the shockwave hit it, caused the refrigerator to get lofted, and now it's moving faster than the shockwave. Well, that just can't happen. My name is Greg Spriggs.
Keren Elazari.
Dr. Paul Sutter.
Dr. Yana Howard.
Serena Arnold.
Sasha Lucioni.
Gretchen Benedict.
Today we're going to be looking at nuclear explosions.
The science of outer space.
Robotic scenes.
Storm scenes.
AI scenes.
Asteroid disasters.
Hacking clips from film and television and discuss how real is it. Hi, I'm Keren Elazari, a security researcher, author, and friendly hacker. I've been in the cybersecurity space for more than 25 years. Yikes! I wouldn't do that. That is bad. Bad OPSEC. Bad operational security. The computer might actually be physically booby-trapped. Well, if I had a computer like that, I was bringing it in for investigation, I might even x-ray it before I did anything with it. When we bring in a device for a digital forensics investigation, we usually open it up in a lab environment, not in the middle of our agency office.
This is Omega site.
I don't know the term Omega site. I think that's just added Hollywood jargon to make it look scary.
Most encrypted level he has.
It wouldn't be a level. It might be a file or, a segment of the hard drive. There's no levels. It doesn't look like this. There's definitely no 3D, moving animations of what the file is doing.
Looks like obfuscated code to conceal its true purpose.
Okay, that bit is real. Yes, you could obfuscate your code, and malware authors often do this.
He's using a polymorphic engine to mutate the code. Whenever I try to gain access, it changes.
We have seen polymorphic code, specifically with malware. So now we finally see a hex version of the code. Hex stands for hexadecimal. Now, hexadecimal means 16. You typically can see only 16 characters, 0 till 9, A to F. You won't see G, you won't see R, you won't see O. You could do a lot of things with code and it can be beautiful, but it's not gonna look like a map. It's not gonna have these, curly lines. This is something completely different. I think this is maybe 3 out of 10, and I'm just giving them some points for, putting in some actual real-world terms like malware, polymorphism and code obfuscation, but that's pretty much where the realism ends, unfortunately, Mr. Bond.
They're in the middle of the final round of the qualifier for a CTF.
So Elliot and Darlene are visiting a hackerspace that is currently hosting a CTF. A CTF is a capture the flag competition. And this is a type of hacker games. It might be about decrypting a really unique piece of code or something like that. So in this scene, they're in the qualifying rounds for DEF CON. And DEF CON is a real world hacking conference. It's the world's largest hacking conference. There's even hackathons and CTFs that take place in Italian farms. I've been to CTFs at convention centers, university campuses, although the one they're at right now is extra underground.
They let you save and load your game, restoring all the mines you found and all the shells you cleared. That's the weakness.
What Elliot is doing could be even considered quite rude. Having somebody shoulder surf you like that. Yes, it does happen. However, for Elliot to, within 1 second understand what's going on that screen, get all the context of that code, and then tell them how to win that challenge. I understand the show, of course, sets him up to be of above average intelligence, but he would have to be like a supercomputer.
The game trusts whatever data you give it to recreate the board. Poison the data. You can make it run whatever code you want.
It sounds like the hackers need to reverse engineer or to take apart a Minesweeper style game. This sounds quite realistic. It's actually based on the real world CTF challenge from 2012. So I think it's really cool the show went to the trouble of getting a real world hacking challenge. Dude! A CTF room can get loud, it can get sweaty, it can get smelly, it can be electric.
All I have to do is hack the registrar and change the name server configs.
And what he's doing right now is very realistic, and it would have taken him a lot longer than it did. One does not hack a registrar in 2 seconds. Elliot needs to get in touch with the backdoor that they planted inside eCorp in the past season. In order to do that, he's utilizing the fact that backdoor, which is basically a computer software, has a hard-coded C2 domain. C2 in this context means command and control. And it's oftentimes where hackers or malicious criminals create a piece of code that's going to run inside an organizational network. But in order to be in a position to communicate with the backdoor, Elliot first needs to take over the domain. And the next thing he does, and we see him do it, is issue the command shred. Shred is a Unix command to not just delete files, but also rewrite them so that the files would be much more difficult to recover, even with specialized forensic software. I'm gonna rate this scene at 9 out of 10. I'm only deducting the 1 point just because of how fast everything happened and how quickly those hackers let Elliot jump into their CTF game. Well, we can tell she's a hacker. She's got all those stickers on her laptop. Nineball, Rihanna, is using open source intelligence, which is a fancy term for the internet. This is what's called a spear phishing attack. She's not just going on a fishing expedition, she is spear phishing. She's targeting this particular individual with an email with a topic, something that he's really, passionate about. There are definitely attacks out there that would give an attacker control of your webcam, and they could even turn on your webcam and you wouldn't know that it's on. But it typically takes a little bit more time and a tiny little bit more of interaction on the side of the victim. They would maybe run an application, install something. It will take a little bit extra. These types of physical boxes that would allow you to unlock any passwords don't really exist for computer passwords. Many of you have a phone that if you put in the 4-digit PIN or 7-digit PIN and you get it wrong, the phone will get wiped after 5 or 10 wrong attempts. So those physical boxes in the real world, used mostly by law enforcement, would bypass that using all kinds of different tricks, but they would require physical access to be connected with a cable to their target device, to the phone. It makes sense that they require an additional password just to get access to that particular software. That's cool, that makes sense. However, this looks like a 12-character password, and it's got not just numbers, but also uppercase, lowercase, and special characters. For a password of that length, it would have about 94 to the power of 12 different possible combinations. That's a number so big that I can't even spell it out. You'd have to use the whole screen just to write down right here. There is no way an electronic box could crack that. And if Nineball has a box like that, it's more valuable than whatever it is they're going to steal from the Metropolitan Museum. I would probably say the first part about the spear phishing is extremely realistic, but then it kind of loses the realness. So I'm gonna average it at 7 out of 10. I think it was the turning point where Hollywood started showing realistic hacking. So what we're seeing here is that Trinity is using Nmap, which is a legit network scanning and mapping tool that hackers use all the time. We also see her using something called SSH nuke. So SSH nuke refers to secure shell, and SSH nuke is, according to the movie, basically an attack against the SSH service where she's taking advantage of a specific vulnerability. And it's even telling us it's attempting to exploit SSH version 1 CRC32. So this was a real-world vulnerability in SSH that was only discovered maybe about a month before this film went to set. So as somebody was working on the screenwrite, as they were in pre-production, this vulnerability in that piece of code was discovered, and they already featured it in the movie, which I think is extremely timely, extremely accurate. The only tiny element here that isn't that realistic is that she is resetting the password. If she successfully exploits that vulnerability, the exploit would give her root privileges. She wouldn't necessarily have to reset the password. There's no way she could hack like that and not make a ton of typos. All the hackers know you need fingerless gloves to type fast. I'm gonna rate this scene at 9.5 out of 10. And I'm taking away half a point just because of the gloves, girl. So Lisbeth here is doing the groundwork. She is casing her target. What she's doing is basically hanging out and hearing the code as it's being touched in the keypad. And it sounded like 1212, which looks like what she's pressing. So in the real world, it's not that difficult to understand what the different digits sound like if you train your ear to it. She's not gonna mess around with it. She's not gonna plug her computer and be seen doing all kinds of nefarious things. She's gonna take photos, get out of there, and then analyze those photos to see exactly what the hardware setup is, what the router is, what the type of communication setup is in that apartment building, and then she procures a specific device from one of her fellow hackers. I think that's very realistic. Looks like a hacker space, looks like a lot of places I've visited, definitely. The device itself is hard to say exactly what it is. We see that it's a Nokia. This might be in reference to something called the Nokia N900, which used to be known in hacker circles as the Pwn phone. And it was a phone that was used primarily for wireless network hacking. However, it didn't look exactly like this. So this might be a specialized device. It might be a tablet that's got both a cellular connection and a network interface. It might be something similar to this. The device she's using in the movie is a little bit dramatized. It's a device that you can plug into the Ethernet. That's where you put in the network connection. And it also has room for a SIM card. So you put in a SIM card, it's got a cellular uplink, and you plug it into the wall. It's actually designed to look like an air freshener. And if I was doing a security assessment, I would sneak in, just like Lisbeth does. I would plug this into the electricity, into the network, and then I would use the cellular connection to basically, from my remote hacker hideout, to plug in, call up this bad boy, and run some network assessments, see what I can sniff, see what I can capture on that network. So based on what we just saw, I'm gonna give it 10 out of 10. It's a very realistic scene.
Billy Olsen's sitting here and had the idea of putting some of the pictures next to pictures of farm animals and have people vote on who's hotter.
So apparently Mark Zuckerberg indeed live blogged everything that's going on in this scene when he created his face mash. So everything that he's writing, I'm gonna assume the screenwriters grabbed from his actual blogs.
A number to represent each person's hotness like they do on hotornot.com.
A website called Am I Hot or Not was around. It was very popular.
Fortunately, Harvard doesn't keep a public centralized Facebook, so I'm going to have to get all the images from the individual houses that people are in.
So he has to tweak his script or has to tweak his process to match the specific houses, which is very realistic. Even today, academic institutions' internal web pages are a spaghetti of different types of code bases and servers.
They require a username password.
For one of the houses, he is required to provide a username and password. And the movie shows us for a split second that he's got the M. Zuckerberg login, but then we see he logs in with another username called Bolson. This is a hack. This is a moment where he uses somebody else's access, and that would be, probably against the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, certainly against the Harvard Rules of Engagement.
Dunster is intense. That may be difficult. I'll come back later.
Hey, sharply son. What?
This is very realistic. If there's one that poses an additional layer or additional challenge, we won't spend too much time on it. We will circle back and get back to it. And this is also what the criminals do. They go for the low-hanging fruits. They go for the easier targets first, and only later, or if they're trying to achieve a very specific goal, they would go for the target that's even marginally harder. You want to have that additional layer of effort for the bad guys to get in.
To break out Emacs and modify that Perl script.
And the movie represents it as if it all took place over one drunken evening, where in the real world, it took him at least a couple of nights. He was obviously very capable with what he was doing, but these are no zero-day exploits. These are not novel, innovative attacks that we've never seen before. Basically, he is automating the process of grabbing images from web servers. So something quite simple. I would give it 9 out of 10. I think the only unrealistic elements here is basically the fast forward that they did to make everything happen within one dramatic evening.
Hack 'em all.
This hack is actually based on a real-world hack that was demonstrated about a year before this movie came out. So back in 2015, Charlie Miller and Chris Valachek demonstrated that they can remotely hack a 2014 Jeep Cherokee using the infotainment system. I don't think it would have been realistic in 2016 and might not even be realistic today for a hacker to be able to get into a lot of different makes and models of cars. Even the best automotive security researchers would struggle with remotely turning on the ignition for a car that doesn't already have a feature like that built in. However, in the future, we're going to see cars that are much more connected than ever before. This could be a very scary, realistic scenario. They are using, I guess, unlimited computing power to coordinate the movements of all of these vehicles. If you think about it, even if you have remote control of a vehicle's steering, you would still need to have a satellite view of where all the cars were going and to somehow coordinate all of them to make them all go in, the same direction or where you want them to hit. So let's go for 7 out of 10. I'm taking away points for how easy everything is. Cypher already has everything set up. All she has to do is click on a tablet. I have definitely done that in the past. So looking for a note, looking for a piece of paper that's gonna have the password for the system that you wanna access. People write down their passwords, but even further than that, people recycle their passwords. I just have to go to some of the many databases of leaked passwords, and I can easily find that you had 5 or 6 different accounts where you use the same password. So I'm gonna bet that you're gonna use that same password or a very close variation of it for a lot of your other online services. And hackers do this all the time. It's called credential stuffing. And we're just gonna stuff them and try and see if any account, any system lets us log in. It's super easy for hackers to look over your social media posts, or maybe even when you're on a Zoom call and you've got that post-it with the password just behind you there. You want to enable things like 2-factor or multi-factor authentication. And sometimes that additional layer of security could also be biometrics. This scene gets 10 out of 10 for accuracy. I've done it myself.
Ariam, how are we doing on the data core audit?
The probe used multiple SQL injections, but I've yet to find any compromised files.
This is terrible. This is horrendous. So I gotta tell you, when I first saw this show, I shut down my TV that very second. To think that a space probe in the future, in space somewhere, would use something like an SQL injection to attack a Federation spaceship. So SQL injections are something that hackers use nowadays. You're banking on the fact that the SQL server is gonna run whatever you input. And this is ironic because SQL was first created in the 1960s or 1970s. So maybe the writers of the show are basically telling us that we're stuck with SQL for the foreseeable future. I give it 1 out of 10.
So they log on to our boxes, and our boxes log on to the real Wi-Fi?
Between everyone's device.
The scenario that's described in this scene is very realistic, and they're using a real-world device, a Wi-Fi Pineapple made by Hack5. What I've got over here is the Wi-Fi Pineapple Nano, which is a much smaller version of the routers that they used in the show, and it's designed to be very sleek, so you could walk around with something like this in your backpack, and nobody would be the wiser. So any phones or computers walking around the vicinity of a device like this would be logging onto this instead of the legitimate access point that they think they are logged onto. And they wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
So we show them a fake landing page and force everyone to download a doctored version of the Hooligan app.
The second part of the hack is also realistic. They're using their control of the Wi-Fi to point people to a website they control, made up to look like the Hooli Conference website. I would rate this at 10 out of 10. I highly doubt that the CIA would have servers that would be accessible over the internet. While she's on that server, all the files are organized really neatly in cool folders with all of the covert projects' names. Now, this may seem unrealistic, but actually a year after this film came out, we actually saw something called Vault 7, which was featured by WikiLeaks, which was an actual leak from the CIA, and they did have a lot of their covert operations, including their hacking tools, organized in files and folders like that. It doesn't look like any security monitoring tool that I know. However, what's probably happening here is that Nikki is using a backdoor that somebody has already set up from inside the CIA. So basically, Nikki's computer is sending packets to specific ports on the CIA's computer. And after a specific sequence, so a packet sent, let's say, to port 7000, port 8000, port 9000, the CIA's computer accepts that as a secret handshake and opens up a connection from inside the CIA to Nikki's computer. This is a realistic capability. Again, they're using a basic capability. Traceroute is something that even your Windows computer could do, any Unix computer could do, but the CIA has that added extra stuff they put in there that's going to correlate it not just to a physical location somewhere in the world, but also to the accurate GPS coordinates.
SecOps hacking camp.
So it's remarkable. The CIA instantly knows that location. They know it's a hacker space. They know all the hackers in the world, and they know where they live.
Kill the power to the building.
You know, this is not a capability that an intelligence agency is going to flaunt. If they have such a capability to remotely kill the power to a specific building, when hackers hacked the electricity system in Kiev in the Ukraine in 2015 and then again in 2017, they took down the power for chunks of the city, and it took them months to set up that hack. I don't know if this is something that could be realistically done in such a targeted manner to one house in particular. We see IP addresses that are simply impossible. For example, an IP address that begins with 300. So IP addresses are made up of 4 octets, 4 segments. Each octet has 3 digits. The digits, of course, could be 0. So it could be anything from 0 to 255. Anytime in the movies you see an IP address that starts with, that's like 257, it's bogus. It doesn't exist in the real world. If I'm hacking, I will probably have some tools that are gonna alert me if my computer is being scanned or tracked, but it would not look like this. I'm gonna give it a 6 out of 10 rating. They did include some very realistic things, but bogus IP addresses, that's not gonna fly. Okay, so Hackers is my ultimate all-time favorite hacker movie. It's the reason I chose to become a hacker in the first place. This is what it looks like when somebody is analyzing a piece of code. An entire night goes by, a montage passes us by. He needs all that time, and he's got friends, and they're, eating cold pizza, drinking warm energy drinks. That's the hacker menu I grew up on.
This is every financial transaction Ellingson conducts, yeah?
Now we actually see hexadecimal on the left, and to the right, the ASCII characters or the financial transactions that the hex code would actually represent in the Ellingson Corporation's computer systems. So this is fairly realistic. The antagonist is using the Da Vinci virus. They basically created a very disruptive virus that's threatening to capsize the Ellingson Mineral Corporation's oil tankers if it's not paid $1 million. Mind you, this is the first case of ransomware that Hollywood has ever depicted. Before ransomware became a thing in the real world. Nowadays, we have a lot of attacks like this where criminals take over your computer system and request a payment in order to decrypt the files and give you back access to your systems. So while it wasn't accurate back when the film took place in the 90s, I think it really predicted the future. I would love to give this 10 out of 10. I'm gonna take away 2 points, a couple of points, just because we don't actually see any of the software code.
My name is Greg Spriggs. I work at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Prior to that, I worked at the Los Alamos National Laboratory in the Critical Mass Lab.
I can get it out over the bay.
Actually, that was one of the better ones. It had the right shape and it had the glow time, and the fireball eventually cools, and it cools very rapidly by radiative heat transfer. So the length of time that the fireball continues to glow is referred to as the glow time.
It's out over the bay. It's clear of the city.
These mushroom clouds can go up as high as 40,000 feet in the air, so you'd be able to see it from way off. There'd be no danger from nuclear fallout unless the wind was blowing directly towards them. So there's a general rule of thumb. If you look at the cloud, the mushroom cap, if it's white, then you will have zero fallout for the most part. If it looks dirty, then it means that dirt got into the fireball, and now there's a carrier material which will bring the nuclear bomb debris down and create local fallout. So if you detonate it over the water, very little fallout. The people that were standing on the bridge kind of felt a breeze. That happened a lot too soon. It would have taken a finite length of time for that shock wave to make it out there. And I would give it a 7. The flash was good and the shape of the detonation was good. It went off and then this plasma was squirting out through that fissure. Potentially, if they actually could do that, it would break up the asteroid. If the asteroid is small enough, it would be very difficult if you had a large asteroid to get a weapon big enough in yield to cause it to completely break up. That would be a very difficult thing to do. In outer space, of course, there is no shock wave, and if there was, why would it be disc shape? It's a spherical shock wave. There would be a bright flash and everything would cool within 20 microseconds, so you wouldn't be seeing this long glow time that they show in the movie and people on Earth looking up and seeing this white flash. You would see the flash, but it would only last for 10 to 20 microseconds. If it's small enough and you could break it up, then it could possibly dissipate in the atmosphere. It could burn itself out. These two halves, yeah, that would be very unpredictable. From realism, I'd give it a 1. If you went in and actually drilled into an asteroid and tried to break it up, how do you know what it's going to break up into and where are the pieces going to fly?
This is a matter of life and death.
They were trying to hold all the cables in place. This was a test. They weren't certain that this particular design was going to work. And so this was sort of the prototype, and they didn't go to great lengths to make everything really robust. So they were just basically winging it with duct tape to hold things in place. And the actual one probably was a little bit more structured and more engineered to be a real weapon. The reason they suspended the bomb from the tower, they wanted to get it above the ground so they could measure the shock wave. There was a lot of uncertainty, since it was the first one, there was a lot of uncertainty as to whether this would work, and if it did work, how much energy would be released. And so they needed to be able to film this, and they didn't want the shock wave interacting with the surface. They thought that if they suspended it up high enough that they would kind of suppress the amount of nuclear fallout that would occur by all the dirt being lofted.
Detonator charged.
They had actually built several shelters for the scientists. I think the closest shelter was about 5 miles away. And of course, everybody was wearing goggles. When the detonation goes off, it would look very bright, but it would protect their eyes. Here are the glasses, very, very dark. Right now, I can't see anything. It's pitch black in here. But if a nuclear detonation went off, I could see it.
3, 2, 1.
And they were all laying down thinking that the shock wave might get to them, and if they were laying down, that it wouldn't be a direct hit. You don't want to have a big surface area if the shock wave is coming over. You want to be kind of laying flat. There have been situations where we've had tests where the yield was a little bit higher than what people thought, or the wind blew the bomb a little bit closer to the observers, that people have actually gotten a little bit of a sunburn. I don't think the sunscreen would have helped very much. It's basically a heat flux that hits you. I guess it would have helped a little bit, but not much. For the accuracy of what the weapon looked like and how they hung it from the tower and so forth. So maybe a 7?
Oh, that can't be good at all.
Back in the 50s, they were very, very conscious of showing the nuclear weapons. The weapon that was hanging off of that tower, they actually had what were called tower cabs that were built up at the top. The cab itself had either plywood walls or had some sort of curtain. They were paranoid that some other nation was going to fly over and take a photograph of what the bomb looked like. The bomb was just sitting there hanging off of a cable. Again, not quite true to history.
7, 6, 4, 3.
The lead-lined refrigerator kind of struck me odd. Everybody knows about lead poisoning. Why would you have a refrigerator with lead in it? You would need several feet thickness of lead in order to actually knock down the radiation to the point where he might have been able to survive it. If the house had a basement, I would have gotten into the basement. That's probably the only thing that would have saved him from the thermal blast and from the shock wave. Got several of the physics things correct. The first thing that happens after a nuclear detonation occurs is that you get a large burst of prompt radiation. You get neutrons and prompt gammas coming off of the fissioning process. You don't necessarily see that. An observer might actually feel it if they were in close enough, and that would be a bad thing. The next thing is that there's a very intense thermal pulse. You get this very intense thermal blast from a nuclear detonation that you do not get with a conventional explosive. And so anything that's close to that detonation point, such as the mannequins that they had standing out in the front yards, those would be incinerated. The time scale was a little wrong. That incineration occurs very, very quickly. Those mannequins would have disappeared into a puff of smoke within a couple tenths of a second. As for the glass, the thermal pulse would have gone right through it, so the glass probably wouldn't have shattered. And it's not until the shock wave gets there that things actually get smashed. Here you have a shock wave, and the car is keeping in front of it. And then the refrigerator is actually moving faster than the shock wave. The shock wave hit it, caused the refrigerator to get lofted, and now it's moving faster than the shock wave. Well, that just can't happen. As the shock wave goes out, it eventually degenerates into what we call an acoustic wave. It's traveling at the speed of sound. So imagine this refrigerator hitting the ground going at 760 miles an hour. I don't think it has the structural strength, even with the lead in it, to withstand that kind of an impact. When the shock first goes out, it's moving outward, and it leaves behind a very low density bubble where the detonation occurred, which causes a huge buoyant force. And as that bubble starts to rise, it sucks everything back in. So this is called the negative phase. So in this case, Indy would not have been thrown out, but he would have been thrown out and then sucked back in again. I would give it a 3 in terms of realism. He got the thermal pulse right, and he got the positive phase of the shock wave correct, but the rest of it kind of fell apart. The subsidence crater is produced by a cavity that's created underground. When the detonation goes off, it vaporizes the material, but the material's still there. It's just in a plasma state. And there's a lot of air spaces in dirt and in rock. And what happens basically is you get this very high temperature, very high pressure region underneath in the cavity, and it compresses everything around it. It's kind of like taking a thick piece of styrofoam and stepping on it. And it squishes this dirt and rock surrounding dirt into this higher, denser layer, which leaves the cavity behind. This is one of the problems with these nuclear detonations in the movies, is they try to incorporate everything into one shot. Where did that bright flash of light come from? If it was underground, you wouldn't see a bright flash. There certainly is a shockwave in the Earth's crust, and it moves very, very fast. The way it was portrayed in this film clip, it looks like it's some sort of a tidal wave of dirt bulging up and then kind of moving along at a slow pace. And they've actually filmed this. They did approximately 800 tests in Nevada test site. After they stopped doing atmospheric testing, they decided they would do all the testing underground. There's no tidal wave of the dirt bunching up the way they showed it, and there would be no shock wave coming out of the ground that would damage a helicopter flying over.
Shockwave took down a damn chopper.
SEMP, electromagnetic pulse.
You don't get an EMP unless you have a detonation high in the atmosphere, which then can interfere with communication, electronic equipment on the Earth. You generate these high currents in the atmosphere. You would not get that with a detonation underground. And they were trying to take all of the basically understood nuclear weapon effects and put it into one detonation underground. And I would also give it a 1. It certainly wasn't realistic. If you took a nuclear weapon and you detonated it out in true outer space, not in the upper atmosphere, but in outer space, what happens is the bomb would vaporize because of all the energy that would be deposited in the weapon itself. There is no shockwave in outer space. Shockwave can only occur when you have this disturbance moving through some other medium. And they kind of show this ball of gas, which that would not be associated with the nuclear detonation itself. Too much mass involved with it. And also, it would cool almost immediately. And you're in outer space, you get these radiative cooling, and you would see a bright flash, and it would last for maybe 10 to 20 microseconds. And then it would go completely black. Now, the fact that they put this inside of some sort of a structure might have been their fuel that was actually exploding there, and not the nuclear detonation. You know, if this explosion was propagating down the length of this spaceship, then okay, it lasts longer. But if it were an instantaneous kind of thing, it would cool almost immediately. It was my least favorite. I'd give it a 1. I have never even seen that before. I don't even know what would cause a hole like that. I'm not sure where they came up with that. If they had detonated this much deeper down, you may not have gotten a cloud at all. It's sort of like an underground shot. If you go deep enough, you really don't see the effect on the surface at all. When the detonation goes off, it creates this low density region, and basically it would be a big bubble underneath the water, and that has a buoyant effect, and as it pops up, it causes this water spout. They do have the shockwave moving out, and the water spout does kind of form. These kind of shots do produce waves. They're not very big waves, but they do produce waves. That's not something that would destroy an aircraft carrier. The shockwave would have traveled through the water and it would hit the hull of the ship. And there's a possibility that when you hit it on the side like that with a really strong shockwave, that it could cause antennas on the deck to break. But certainly there wouldn't be a shockwave above the surface that was causing that to tip over. During Operation Crossroad, which was the first detonation after World War II, they wanted to see what the effect would be on the Navy fleet if a detonation were to occur underwater. So they took a lot of the destroyers and aircraft carriers and they put them in the middle of the Bikini Atoll and they detonated the shot under it. The other ships ended up getting a lot of damage from the nuclear fallout. Again, it was close enough to the surface that probably the shock wave would have hit the ships, hit the hull, and could have caused damage. But for the most part, it was mostly radioactive material that settled onto the decks. Some shock wave emerging from underneath the water and then propagating through the air and knocking the helicopter out, probably not realistic. But again, I mean, if it were close enough and it became part of that water spout, yeah, it would certainly take out the helicopter. Again, I would give it a low mark here, maybe a 2.
I'm Dr. Paul Sutter. I'm a cosmologist, author, and NASA advisor. I also host my own YouTube channel and podcast.
All in a line. A syzygy.
Did he say syzygy? Oh, good for him. I'd cry if I saw a syzygy. Syzygy is one of my favorite words in all of astronomy, and it's simply when more than 2 objects line up in a straight line. That's it. Anytime you have more than 2 objects in the same system, you have a 3-body problem or 4-body problem or on and on. And in this case, for this show, they have 3 suns that are all orbiting around each other in a very complicated way, and predicting how those stars are going to orbit is very challenging. A real 3-body problem that we encounter all the time in the solar system is trying to predict the orbits of near-Earth asteroids. So if we see a little asteroid out there, and we're like, oh my gosh, is this gonna hit us or not? We have to calculate its trajectory through the solar system with all the gravitational influence of the sun, of the Earth, of Jupiter over there. And like that gets really, really complicated really quickly, which is why we're always revising and updating our predictions of orbital trajectories of asteroids.
The planet's under the gravitational force of all 3 suns!
Syzygies do create slightly stronger gravitational pulls, but this is a very extreme example that would not be realistic. When the moon and the sun are on the same side, we get extra tides. We get extra gravitational pull, but the oceans don't go flying out, buildings don't disintegrate and helicopters get pulled out into space. That's not a thing, because if the gravity was that strong, then everything on this planet would have been destroyed eons ago already.
When we unfold its higher dimensions, even a tiny proton becomes something very large indeed.
We have particle colliders all around the world that are accelerating protons and other particles to nearly the speed of light every single day. This is something we're good at. And the goal of this facility is to trigger nuclear fusion in that target. Unfolding a dimension is not a real thing. Yes, they say they can do that, but that's not how it works. The dimensions are the dimensions. It's just what space is. You can't take one of these compact dimensions and make it bigger. I would rate this a 3 out of 10 for realism. It started off okay with discussions of compact dimensions, but then lost some points because everything else after that was nonsense.
What I'm proposing is we start accelerating immediately.
His mannerisms of physicists and engineers explaining stuff to other people is dead on. We grab random stuff and just say, okay, imagine this is the particle, and then it's going over here, and it's exactly what we do.
We don't intercept with Earth at all, but we come close enough to get a gravity assist and adjust course.
The problem here that they were trying to face was that getting to Mars takes a really, really long time. It's really far away, and it's on its own orbit. And the idea here used in the movie, which is all mathematically sound, it's all solid orbital mechanics, was that if you are able to slingshot off the Earth, you get a speed boost and you can return back to Mars faster than you would have initially thought, as if you had launched it from the surface of the Earth.
You're Mars. Now, we're going too fast at this point to fall into orbit, but we can do a flyby.
Yes, when you're sending an object to another planet, you have a few choices. You can do a close flyby, or if you do it just right, it will come in and what we say is fall into orbit, where it'll end up making a permanent loop around that planet. And so if you're coming in too fast, you simply have too much energy. The gravity of the planet isn't strong enough to hold onto you. You're just going to be deflected in your path. They just had too much energy. They had too much speed. So there was a trade-off. They can get to Mars faster, but that means they can't stay there. he has to get to as high an altitude as possible so that he can intercept the oncoming spacecraft. But in order to do that, he has to get rid of mass. The less stuff he has, then for the same amount of fuel, the same amount of thrust, the higher up he can get. So that's true. This is Newton's third law in action. If I punch a hole and the gas escapes, the gas goes this way, I go this way. But if it's on the palm of my hand, it's away from my center, which means it won't just push me, it will twist me. And so if you actually tried that, you would end up tumbling uncontrollably. This is gonna sound crude, but if he had punctured his crotch, that would be on a line to his center of mass, and that would have propelled him straight up.
I got him!
In space, everything is complicated. You can't move around as nimbly as you can without a spacesuit, and you're trying to operate in 3 dimensions, so it's not like a relay race where you're guaranteed to have the ground underneath you the whole time. And so you're trying to match this precise speed in this alien environment in 3 dimensions, not something our monkey brains are really capable of handling, and it's just all hard, and it makes for a great movie. I would rate these clips a 10. Full 10, 100%. I love this, but it's just such a wonderful movie, and it's all about science and science saving the day. So much good science in the black hole image. Light follows the curves, the hills and valleys of space-time. And these curves are set by massive objects. This was one of the earliest tests of Einstein's theory of relativity. And black holes bend space a lot. And so what we're seeing is there's a thin disk called an accretion disk surrounding the black hole. But if you're standing on one side of the black hole, light from the back end, which normally you wouldn't see because, black hole in the way, there's light that's going up this way, but then gets bent and curves right to you.
Goodbye, Taj.
Goodbye, Dr. Brent.
Newton's third law is for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And this is the fundamental basis for space travel. We push against the air to get our airplanes to go, but in space, there's no ground. There's no air. So we can only push against ourselves. If we throw something away from us, that propels us in the equal and opposite direction. And so what I think he's going for here, old Cooper, to get him away from that orbit, if he pushes something towards the black hole, that will nudge the spacecraft away from that orbit and give it a safe escape.
Approaching the event horizon. Port side, dipping down beneath it.
The event horizon is the one-way barrier. This is the edge of the black hole. This is the point of no return, that if you cross the event horizon, then gravity is so strong, it's so overwhelming that nothing, not even light, can escape.
It's all black. Tars, do you read me?
When Cooper first falls through the black hole, then he goes, oh, everything's black. No, you're not the only thing falling into a black hole. There's light from the entire rest of the universe that's falling in with you. For a supermassive black hole like this, like Gargantua in the movie, you've got a handful of seconds from the moment you cross the event horizon to the time you hit the singularity. That was an incredibly accurate depiction. In fact, it's one of the most accurate depictions of the environment around a black hole ever made. I would give it a 9. Okay, a point off because, it's not actually dark in there, but honestly, we don't know what actually happens inside of a black hole, so that's fair game.
So how do we make it? Awaken the heart of a dying star.
Thor needs the energy from a dying star to create his new weapon, which is called Stormbreaker. Stars die when they run out of fuel. So every star in the universe fuses elements into heavier ones, which releases some energy. But no matter what star you have, iron is always the end of the limit. That's the most you can get, because after that, the fusion process doesn't release energy, it takes it. So once a star fuses iron, it's done. There's a lot of good Newtonian mechanics there with the spinning of the rocket and then letting it go and then grabbing it and using that's its own propulsion to move this massive ring thing. A Dyson sphere is this concept developed by famed physicist and mathematician Freeman Dyson, where the idea is like, hey, if you're a civilization on the move, you got your wind power, your nuclear power, you got your solar power. Eventually, you're going to tap out all of the energy sources available on a planet. So, hey, if you need a lot of energy, what if you pulverize your planet and turn it into a whole bunch of solar panels facing inwards on your star? And that way you can capture as much light as possible. Most of the light emitted by the sun just goes off into empty space, misses us completely. So if you capture that, then you can use it and make a new hammer. Once a star is dead, it's just dead. Just let it go, man. But neutron stars can release enormous amounts of energy. And that's because you have an object that's one step away from a black hole. You've got this incredibly dense ball of material. Fastest rotating neutron stars rotate at over 10,000 RPM. That's faster than a kitchen blender. There are enormous energies involved with this compression of matter rotating at that speed. And so, yeah, they can power up some seriously incredible energetic outbursts. Yeah, that's what struck out to me the most, actually, is like they awaken this dying star, whatever that is, and it sends this like energy beam out, and then the characters are all like, oh, that's cool. Like, these are energies that can rip apart planets, that can vaporize anything. To be close to a source of energy like that, you wouldn't get to look at it. You would just be destroyed. We're gonna have to scrape the bottom of the barrel here for accuracy. I would rate this clip a 4. Neutron stars are a real thing. Neutron stars actually have a lot of energy, and Newton's law is still valid in the comic book universe.
6, 5, 4.
When this device switched on and we had the battleship out front, full of all the observers, and the battleship started tilting towards it, and I was thinking, like, if this thing has immense gravitational pull, why is there just a tilt instead of the whole ship being pulled along with all the water? I mean, it looked amazing. It was very cool to look at. So this machine consists of a passenger pod, a little vessel, surrounded by some protective shielding and metal, and then a series of rings. Through various alien magic, the rings open up a wormhole and then drop that passenger sphere in, and then the passenger sphere travels through the wormhole to the distant destination. A wormhole is a hypothetical tunnel or bridge through space and time that can connect two very, very distant regions in space and time and bring them closer together so that you don't have to go the long way, which might involve a whole lot of light years. There's nothing scientific about using spinning rings to create a wormhole, but they sure do look cool. The only way we know to create a wormhole is to start off with a blob of what's called exotic matter. What makes it exotic is that it has negative mass. If you've got some exotic matter that weighs negative mass, then you can potentially reconfigure space-time in just the right way to create a stable wormhole. And we don't think it exists because it would kind of violate everything we know about like momentum and energy and all of our experience in physics. Like if you had a ball that weighed -5 pounds and you kicked it, it would go flying in the opposite direction. And if you dropped it, it would go flying upwards. And that seems kind of wrong.
It's a triple, no, quadruple system.
One thing that struck me, though, actually, that seemed very accurate was her attempt to narrate what she was seeing as she was going. And what that reminded me of is if you listen to the Apollo 11 tapes, and the astronauts were trained to narrate what they were seeing. Our view from the Earth was just little cameras, little staticky images. The astronauts themselves could see in so much more detail. And so they were trained, like, don't just look, but keep describing what you see.
Although the surface appears to be very, very fine-grained as you get close to it.
We don't know what a wormhole looks like. We've never traveled down one. We don't even think they exist. You can visualize it however you want. I would rate this clip a 7. Jodie Foster maintained her composure while traveling through a wormhole. I'm pretty sure I'd be barfing and freaking out the whole time. So good for her. When they're approaching the moon to do that lunar roll, as they called it, they turned their spacecraft towards the moon as if they were fighter jets banking into a turn. But this is space. There's no air. There's nothing to bank against. You can just go with it. You're fine. You're gonna go around the moon. It's all good.
9.5 Gs for 11 minutes. I'd start praying about it right now.
So 9.5 Gs means that the pressure you'll feel, the weight you'll get pushed up against your chair, is 9.5 times stronger than our normal experience of gravity. This is generally going to be miserable. 9.5 strikes me as a very unrealistic number, especially for that length of time. They're just going to pass out and be starved of oxygen for 10 minutes, which is dead. The astronauts are getting a gravity assist from the moon so that they can get a speed boost to land on an asteroid. The idea is you need to catch up to it. You need to match speeds with it. Otherwise, you're just going to crash into it. So launching from the surface of the Earth, we can do this. We've done rendezvous missions with moving asteroids and comets. There's no reason for them to experience G-forces during a slingshot maneuver. The whole time you're doing a slingshot maneuver, you're in space. There's hardly any gravity. You don't feel any gravity when you're in space. And when you're doing this slingshot maneuver around the moon, or any object, the moon is big. Yes, you're accelerating, but that boost is taking place over the course of hours as you orbit around the moon. So it's a very slow and gentle process. So you don't feel anything extra. And I saw them in that clip. They're like burning their rockets. And I was like, man, that takes a lot of fuel. And I was like, if you have enough fuel to be already in space and then do this accelerated boost maneuver, like, then just skip the moon and you can just go right to the asteroid. But that's why they don't put me in charge of writing movies. I would rate this clip a 3.
We're being pulled off course.
How?
I'm not certain. It appears to be some kind of graviton surge.
Graviton is a real word. If you were approaching a void, it'd actually be the opposite of a surge because there's less stuff. There's less matter in a void. There's less gravity in a void.
What happened to the stars?
I happen to be one of the top 5 experts on cosmic voids in the world, and that's because there are about 5 people working on voids in the whole world. And they're simply places where there ain't much going on. They have almost no matter within them. If you were to transport our solar system into the middle of a void, not only would there be no stars on the sky, because there'd be no stars around us, you could take almost any telescope and you wouldn't see a single thing, because all the nearest galaxies would be so far away from you that you would need an incredibly advanced instrument to detect them.
But they only pull matter in one direction, into the void. We've calculated the outer circumference at approximately 9 light years.
Oh, circumference is 9 light years. That means the radius is even smaller. This is a tiny thing. This is nothing. Voids are huge. They are amongst the largest things in the universe. The smallest voids are like 20 million light years across on a side. Voids aren't in galaxies. Galaxies are on the edge of voids. They're huge. And if you were to end up in a void, you're not coming out anytime soon.
50,000 kilometers to normal space.
So the easiest way to leave a void is to point yourself to the nearest galaxy and you pack a sandwich and bring a book, because it's gonna take you a while. There are no shortcuts, there are no cheat codes, you just gotta take the slow way. I would rate this clip a 2. The only accurate part of this clip is that the word void is a real science term in astrophysics and cosmology. That's it. What really struck me, which was so beautiful and very, very accurate, was the actual surface of the sun. You know, as the spacecraft is plunging into the sun, we get these great images of these giant arcs and flares and prominences, and the sun really does look like that. We have high-resolution imagery of the surface of the sun that shows just how dynamic and volatile and active and gorgeous it is. In real life, you wouldn't even get as close as that spacecraft got to the sun. With our current technologies, within a few million miles, you get cooked.
You could observe 3.1% for a period of not longer than 30 seconds.
The amount of solar energy that we receive on the Earth is 0.000000045% of the total solar output. The character is told that he can safely observe the sun for a limited amount of time at 3.1% of its total brightness. I wouldn't necessarily trust the computer. Maybe the math all works out, but I'm not playing games. I would give it a 6 because the images of the sun were gorgeous, accurate, spot on, and most people don't get to realize just how gorgeous and dynamic the sun is.
The law of relativity prohibits faster than light travel.
Relativity, yes, we can't break the law of relativity. We can go around it.
I've seen this movie like maybe a million times. We know in our universe that causes always precede effects, and the fastest that a cause can lead to an effect is the speed of light. Going faster than light allows you to have effects that come before their own causes. It breaks down the entire causal structure of the universe, which is why we're pretty sure you can't do it.
Ship doesn't really go faster than light. What it does is it creates a dimensional gateway. It folds space so that point A and point B coexist in the same space and time.
It's a little fuzzy because we don't know how wormholes actually work, but we do know mathematically that they do act like tunnels where you can have as short as a distance as you want between any 2 points. Now, whether this means the actual space-time is getting folded up in a higher dimensional way, that's more of an analogy and a metaphor than what actually happens, which is kind of impossible to describe in words, but that's why we have mathematics, so that we can do stuff that words can't let us do. That is the core of the Event Horizon's gravity drive. They use this to, in the movie, fold space and time so that your starting point and ending point are the exact same place. My best guess as to why this guy's getting sucked into the gravity drive is that when this thing is turning on and generating a singularity, you're taking a whole bunch of matter and compressing it down into a very tiny volume, which generates enormous gravitational forces. That should have ripped the ship apart. You get these enormous things called tidal forces that can stretch and deform matter around it. And so it's like, if it's strong enough to act on a person, it's strong enough to act on everything surrounding the person. No, this was very inaccurate because it made it look like the black hole was two-dimensional. The surface of a black hole is three-dimensional. They're spheres. They're not funnels like this. They're spheres, almost like a planet sitting there that you could orbit around from any direction. I'm going to give a 4. It gets a 4 because that's not really how wormholes work, so lots of points off. But Sam Neill nailing the attitudes of a tired professor, all for it. My favorite space movie / TV show is actually The Expanse. It's a wonderful story, complex, intricate story, and yeah, there are some non-realistic magical elements, but they work really hard to not just set up the physics correctly, but what society would look like in space, and I really appreciate that.
Hi, I'm Dr. Yana Howard. I'm the Dean of Engineering at The Ohio State University. I was Chair of Interactive Computing at Georgia Tech. I was a robotics researcher at NASA's JPL. So that actually exists now. Primarily it's in the VR, AR space, which requires you to usually have some type of augmented goggles or device to see the 3D rendition in the free space and for you to move around it. Believe it or not, jetpacks do exist. Not as much control as the actual Iron Man, but you know, has some vertical lift. In the healthcare medical space, there are exoskeletons that provide you, I would say, superhuman ability or capability. And so pieces of the Iron Man suit do exist. They aren't as advanced, but they all exist. So I would say an 8.5. Another 3 or 4 years, it would probably be a 10.
Hello, I am Baymax, your personal healthcare companion.
Oh, it's such a cute movie. So unrealistic. The only thing that exists is the fact that you have people and a robot, a form factor. Everything else is just imaginary. It's what we would like in our life, but we're kind of far from even the components of them existing.
Final?
Yeah, going for a non-threatening, huggable kind of thing.
So soft robotics does exist. Soft body robotics is where you have material that's compliant. I always think of it as it's squishy. It actually can apply some forces. Usually the focus is on movement. They are considered safe. It means you can have robots working next to people and the soft robot wouldn't hurt a person if by some chance the robot and the human collided. So really it's about safety. They aren't really designed to do things like walk like a human.
You are not allergic to bacitracin. You do have a mild allergy to peanuts.
I will say in the medical robotics domain, as related to this video clip, there are elements that exist. For example, there are systems that can do diagnosis based on data. I can have an image that looks for things such as tumors. And sometimes, in some cases, at more accuracy or higher accuracy than, say, a untrained radiologist. So those kind of things do exist. They're usually not coupled to a moving platform. I would probably rate it about a 2.
You can now access the CPU.
Central Processing Unit is what CPU stands for. The CPU is basically the chip that powers, in this case, the mind of the robot.
Pull.
Robot vision is based on cameras. The same kind of cameras you have in your smartphone are the same kind of cameras that you have in robot platforms. A lot of computer vision algorithms use methods in deep learning to identify objects, identify people, even identify facial expressions of people. The red tint was for entertainment purposes only. Rebooting is a thing, it's a reality. Rebooting includes refreshing your computer. You can do that with a robotic system. It wipes out all its programming. Robots like Sophia are not as emotive as a human face. And the reason is that the muscles that we have in our face and the kind of nuances that we can exhibit in terms of cheeks and our nose and our eyes, we just don't have the technology yet at that level. I would rate the first part as a 1. I would rate the second part closer to a 5. There's a lot of hurdles, even creating a transformer robot. There is research in robotics called origami robotics. So they can fold themselves up, they can change their locomotion style. They're typically very, very small. My lab actually created a transformer robot, but it was really, really small. Some of the issues, it really is about stability and control. The fact is the larger you create the form factor, the more you have to think about things like gravity. You have to think about weight. How do you ensure that they don't fall over? We do not have sufficient actuation to lift the weight that would be required to create a transformer robot. I would rate this as a 2.5. I probably would rate it as a 1, but I have an affinity for transformer robots.
What I really need is a droid who understands the binary language of moisture evaporators.
Evaporators? Sir, my first job was programming binary load lifters.
I always loved how they showcase robots in Star Wars because they had all of the types of interactions we expect between human and human, and they encoded in a robot form factor. There's actually a number of studies that have looked at the form factor of robotics. Do you have to have a humanoid shape in order to enhance the interaction with people? Most studies show that you don't. It just has to be able to function and behave and move in our human environment. R2-D2, if you think about the form factor and the shape, that is not what evokes our human response or our human compassion or empathy for the robot. What makes R2-D2 so endearing is a combination of the movement. So the movements that go on in terms of doing little dances, for example, turning in place. The other is the sounds that are used. They're very intentional. If you notice, they're typically high-pitched. We associate high-pitched sounds with certain demographics like birds chirping, babies laughing. And so what's going on is that it's evoking that response of the cuteness of the sounds coupled with the movement. It's not the form factor, it's the movements and the language that really taps into our human emotions. So I would actually put this at a 6. So there is a field in robotics called multi-agent collaboration, as well as this area of collaborative robotics. And in that case, there is research that has shown on the order of hundreds of robots that collaborate together. There's different approaches. Some of it is a centralized approach, so there might be a leader that kind of gives commands and communicates with all of the team. And then there's also what's called distributed collaboration, or distributed control, where every agent, every robot has its own objective function and kind of communicates as in a team. As an example, there are robot soccer teams. That's collaborative. They play together, they interact together. Small robots like this are possible. In fact, there are robots about this size that can fly, the size of a bird, of a butterfly, things like that. Of course, they don't have as much functionality as these robots or as much intelligence as these robots. There's even a field of robotics where the robots are even smaller. Nanorobotics, for example, there's a robot that is a pill that you swallow that can actually do some of the imaging in your intestines. That's a whole field that requires different types of tools, different types of materials. And in that space, you're actually doing things at the microscope level. You're actually using things like tweezers to put things together. I would rate this probably at a 3. This movie actually defies physics. Just some fundamental things about the interface and the interaction of bodies and water that just didn't correlate in this movie. Come on! So versatility is a desired objective, but we typically do not focus on it because the more versatile you are, the more likely you'll have failures. Safety and minimizing failures to 0 is much more important than having versatility. So for space robotics, a lot of the things that have to be thought about are about survivability. They have to be able to withstand the radiation of space, the environmental constraints, the extreme temperatures from basically cold. A lot of our space robotics in terms of the processing power is not even as advanced as, say, things on the latest smartphone, because they cannot withstand the severity of the environment in which they're going into. I would rate this a 1. There are elements of this that exist, not at the human level, but at the animal trial mice level, looking at the spine and tapping into the electric signals and trying to use that to control something. The closest that exists in the domain are really 2 areas of robotics research. So one is basically using muscle activation. In that case, what they do is that they pair up your muscles, usually in your chest, and they pair it up with electronics to control the arm. And so that's one example. The other is that there's research where they do direct implants into the brain so that they can extract signals from the brain to control robotic arms. I will tell you, both of them are invasive. They aren't as simple as just strapping on something and automatically you can control the robotics. Both of these kinds of research paths require intense surgery.
These smart arms are controlled by my brain through a neural link. Nanowires feed directly into my cerebellum, allowing me to use these arms.
The closest of controlling robots with your thoughts is looking at some research that uses EEG devices or even EMG, so actually looking at muscle activation. The reality is the resolution that we can extract in terms of bits of information is still very limited. It means that if you're trying to control a robot arm, the most you can kind of think about is like a joystick. I can go up, I can go down, left and right, but it's very difficult to do that intentionally over and over and over again with the resolution that you would need to fully control a robot arm, especially multiple arms. I would actually rate this as a 4. This case, they did design it based on an actual platform with the way that it moves, the way that it navigates. The sensor that was shown, which was most likely a LiDAR, does exist in a small platform. So LiDARs, for example, are in some of the self-driving cars. They are on a number of mobility platforms in the warehouse environment. And so what they do is that they create a 3D point cloud of the environment, and they are fairly robust to things like lighting issues and convex and concave objects. And they are now at a small enough footprint that they can fit into the torso of the robot that we saw. Having a robot plug into an electronic device and magically be able to hack the code and override any passwords and encryption scheme is really not feasible. The energy requirements for a robotic system to continuously activate or actuate, to do the processing in terms of the computation, to do the sensing, solar power would not provide the longevity that's required to actually function for more than a couple of minutes. Traditionally, you wouldn't use solar power, at least for this application. I would probably rate this at about a 3.
Detective, what are you doing?
You said they've all been programmed with the 3 laws, so that means we have 1,000 robots that will not try to protect themselves if it violates a direct order from a human.
Isaac Asimov created these 3 laws of robotics. 1 was thou shalt not harm a human. 2 was thou shalt obey a human as long as it doesn't harm a human. Basically, the concept is that robots are here to help us, and therefore they should never be in a situation where they're not. But the fact is, that's never going to happen. If you think about a very simple device such as a self-driving car, which is a robot if it's autonomous, what do you do if you have your driver and you are about to crash into something? Either you might harm your driver, you might harm the other. What are you supposed to do? And so really, you can't actually follow any of these rules if you're in the human world. It is not possible to hurl a human exactly the way that the robot hurled Will Smith. But the reason why robots in industrial settings typically do not work with humans, if a robot is moving and a human is in the way, the human will be hurled. We are soft bodies that don't do well when we interact with metal that's moving that fast.
What am I?
Can I help you, sir? Can I help you, sir?
Let's take away the intelligence. If you look at the actuation and the mobility, we do have something. Boston Dynamic with Petman actually does parkour, does flips, does turns in midair, gymnastics. That platform does exist. Now, of course, power requirements, it doesn't last that long. It won't survive in the real world for hours like we would need, but the actuation does exist. The intelligence part, though, is not coupled with the movement part. I would rate it as a 3.
Why don't we start with you telling me something about yourself?
Well, you already know my name, and you can see that I'm a machine.
The Turing test was a test that was created to really try to figure out how do you know when a computer is intelligent. And so the concept is that if you had an individual that asked questions of a computer and of a person, if the person who was asking the questions could not tell the difference between computer and person, i.e. mislabeled, then the computer had passed the Turing test. The problem, of course, is that it's the observer who is saying, oh, I can't tell the difference. So the Turing test has been, quote unquote, beaten all of the time because it's based on the observer point of view and it's based on the questions that you ask.
When did you learn how to speak, Ava?
I always knew how to speak. And that's strange, isn't it?
You know, a lot of times when we're thinking about a language model, it takes hours and hours, and sometimes days, depending, in order to come up with the ability to have a conversation. And so the fact that she very easily, on the order of milliseconds, could acquire new knowledge, could actually understand new nuances to the questions that were asked is actually not a realistic aspect of our current state of art. I would rate this as a 2.5.
Hey everybody, I'm meteorologist Serena Arnold, and I've done icing and turbulence test flights with NASA contractors, installed weather stations on the Alaska tundra, and was the director of the world-famous Mount Washington Observatory.
Oh my God. Lisa, this tornado just came and erased the Hollywood sign.
Los Angeles isn't free of being hit by tornadoes. They absolutely can have them. In fact, since 1950, there have been 42 recorded tornadoes in Los Angeles. And in 1983, South LA took a direct hit from a rather large tornado and several people were killed. The chances of getting severe thunderstorms can happen anywhere. All 50 states of the United States have recorded tornadoes in them. We just happen to get a few more of them in the Midwestern United States because the ingredients for them to happen just are there a little bit more frequently.
Can you see? Is anyone hurt? I wouldn't be surprised. There is so much damage.
Obviously, if you're going to be part of a media crew, you're going to want to capture a little bit of what's going on. You see the news helicopters flying right by the tornado, which they do from time to time. They'll follow tornadoes in news helicopters, but they're not going to be very close to it. And they're zooming in, I think, a little bit too.
Wait, it looks like they joined and formed one large tornado.
Two tornadoes merging into one. And we do see some instances out storm chasing where you can have a multiple vortice tornado, and that means that you actually have smaller little tornadoes that make up a larger one. And if the condensation in there, meaning the moisture and the water drops that you see, are visible only in those vortices and not surrounding the whole tornado itself, it can actually make it look like there's more than one tornado in one specific location. One thing that movies always kind of get funny is the background clouds and the surrounding storm around the tornado. How dark the sky is when there's a tornado occurring actually depends a lot on your position with the storm. If you're going to be on, say, the northeast side of the tornado and you're going to be under the main part of the thunderstorm, it's probably going to be really dark where you are. But there are places where you can actually have blue sky above you while watching a tornado. Tornadoes typically occur on the southwest side of thunderstorms, and if you happen to be in that area and say southeast of that southwest corner of the storm, you could have beautiful weather above you and see the sun shining on a tornado, making the storm and the tornado look white and not dark at all.
It's unbelievable, it's huge! I've never seen anything.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what the meter was. I'm guessing it was more like a seismograph type thing, measuring the vibrations of the earth, but that definitely wasn't an anemometer measuring the wind speeds. I'd have to rate this one probably like a 6 or a 7. I don't think a tornado would be strong enough to pull creatures up out of the ocean. There is an instance in Louisiana in 1947 where it did rain down fish on a small town because it was likely picked up by a tornado. It's not going to end well for them. They're going to be pulled up to higher elevations. They could potentially freeze, which isn't going to feel well, and then they're going to be falling back down to earth again and hitting the ground. But you're talking things that are pretty small and pretty light. So as the remnants of Hurricane Ida actually passed over New York and New Jersey just earlier this year, there were some situations where there was a flood warning and a tornado warning happening at the same time. And a warning means that it's imminent, that it's actually happening right now, not that it's going to. If I had to rate this from 1 to 10, it's a solid 1.
Everybody underground now!
Don't get in a car if there's a tornado. It's a terrible idea. Don't take safety in your car, please. While we're storm chasing, we're usually out in our cars. If you are in a safe place and you're not too close and want to get out and take a look at it, you can. But you want to try to stay fairly far away from them, you know, half mile to a mile away. And you always want to try to be maybe, you know, on like the southeast side. That's usually for most tornadoes the way they move, the safest place to be. There was a really devastating situation with a large tornado where there were 4 storm chasers killed in their vehicle because the tornado changed direction very rapidly. It grew rapidly, its speed changed, it was very unpredictable, and it ended up killing 4 people who were very knowledgeable about the weather. If you're that close to it, you need to seek shelter. You should be going to a basement if you have one. If you don't, try the lowest elevation that you have in your home and try to make it an interior room as possible. So an interior bathroom, under the stairwell, any of those places are really good safe places in a storm. Tornadoes at night are something that do happen a lot, and they're almost impossible to see. They're actually extremely dangerous. Sometimes the only way you can see where they are is because you're seeing flashes of lightning reflect off the side of the tornado, or you're getting power flashes that show you where it is. Seeing the lightning right on the edges of the tornado is a little more rare. There have been some images captured of lightning with tornadoes happening in close proximity, but for the most part it doesn't. Usually that's happening in a different part of the storm than where the tornado is located. So a lot of people think that it's a pressure differential that causes windows to break and things like that in a storm or when there's a tornado, and it's actually not. There are some pressure differentials there, and sometimes people can feel their ears pop if they're in a house and a tornado passes over it, but usually when you see things break like that, it's because of debris and high wind speeds. Tornadoes can pick up debris and move it and throw it beyond the distance of where that tornado was. So you can have cars that end up in trees or in homes. The static interference that you see on the TV, I think is something that was a lot more popular before everything became digital. Back then, you know, you could see some static or some disruption in the signal as you have a big thunderstorm approaching. It may not necessarily mean that a tornado is there, but you could definitely get some disruption of the signals with a large, severe thunderstorm. So tornadoes are pretty mysterious in that they're a very small area of very, very high wind speeds. And weaker tornadoes or smaller ones have wind speeds around that 100-mile-an-hour or greater threshold, but your very large EF4, EF5 tornadoes can have wind speeds up to 300 miles an hour, and that's really, really devastating. Because you have such high wind speeds in a small area, they can rather pick or choose what they choose to destroy. I've seen homes that are perfectly still and untouched with just a roof ripped off. So for it to be able to pull off just pieces of this building that they're in and take those but leave other parts of the building just fine isn't uncommon. If I had to rate this clip on accuracy, it's pretty good. I'd give it like a 7. That's a lot of tornadoes very close together. I'd be running too if I saw that. The only way you can have multiple tornadoes by each other like that is sometimes when you see a tornado on the ground, it can have a satellite tornado, meaning a smaller one that's actually a part of the same storm that is rotating around it. But that small one is going to be tiny. It's going to look more like a waterspout type of a tornado going around there. But they're really rare. I've never seen one, and a few meteorologists have. Otherwise, if you're lucky enough to see multiple storms lined up producing tornadoes at the same time, you might be able to see one from another, but that's really a stretch. To see them this close together and see that many happening at one time is just completely not possible at all. The best storm chase I've ever been on was October 9th of 2001 in Cordell, Oklahoma. We were out chasing and we saw 7 different tornadoes that day, which was phenomenal. It was a really great chase and we're really fortunate enough to see 7 different tornadoes, including one that was an F3. Tornadoes are rated by the Fujita scale, and now it's actually the enhanced Fujita scale because it was updated. EF5 is the maximum that you can reach on the EF scale. Tornadoes can absolutely hit large metropolitan areas like you see in this clip here. A lot of your tornadoes are a couple football fields wide, if that, but there are some big record-breaking ones out there. We've seen tornadoes up to a mile wide, and there's even been a tornado that's 2.6 miles wide across that was reported in El Reno, Oklahoma. A cold front can't be severe enough to take an airplane out of the sky like that, or freeze the ocean in the way that you saw here. There was an instance around Nantucket actually in January of 2018 where temperatures got cold enough where you actually could see some slush on the top of the ocean. So if it is cold enough, you can get some ice that forms there, but for it to freeze over instantaneously like that, it's just not going to happen. Cold fronts do move quickly. They are something that we can see progress across the country at various speeds, and sometimes they can go 50, 60 miles an hour across, but they just don't have that drastic temperature change with them. I have seen some cold fronts come across Oklahoma where the backside of the cold front, it was in the teens, and on the front side it was just close to 70 degrees. That's a really substantial and record-breaking cold front. But to see things, you know, happen like you saw here in this clip where people are freezing or water's freezing instantly, it's just not possible for that to happen. To be that extreme just isn't possible. It'd have to get like a 2 from me. Cold fronts are real and they do exist. They're not this extreme. And there was a tornado, but it was just a few too many of them. The way this tornado does the damage to this farm and to that building is actually pretty accurate. Having a tornado that far away actually pull someone up into it isn't realistic. Very few people have ever been able to say they've seen the inside of a tornado. I don't know of anybody personally who's been pulled up into a tornado inside their car and has lived to tell about it. There have been a lot of people who have taken some glancing blows from tornadoes or have been spun around on the ground in their car while the tornado passes over, but no instances of someone being pulled up in their car into the tornado and then coming out the top of the storm. There's no scientific evidence out there that something like that can really happen. It would have to be a massive amount of fuel. You do see tornadoes that are made up of fire, though. Actually, a lot of times when there are forest fires, you get things called fire whirls, which are like a dust devil, and they can encompass flames and actually be caused by the fire itself. So that's the closest thing I could think of to what you saw here. They looked a little bit more realistic than when you see in some other movies, but coming out up the top of the tornado and stuff like that is a little bit of a stretch. I'd give it like a 5. Was he hanging on by his tongue?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay. You can take your weight in pounds, cut that in half, and that'll be the speed in miles per hour that you'll be able to walk around max without getting blown over. So if you weigh 150 pounds, it's going to be about 75-mile-an-hour winds are going to be the max that you're going to stay standing for. They're showing people being pulled up and sucked up. So typically, if you think about, say, a skydiver falling out of an airplane and they're free falling, they reach what's called terminal velocity. That's around 120 to 125 miles an hour. So in order to pick somebody up again and do that and be taking them, the wind speeds would have to be at least 120 to 125 miles an hour, and how quickly they'd be moving past that would have to be added on to that amount. So if you want to see someone fly away from you at 25 miles an hour, you're going to need about 150 mile an hour winds to do so. Lightning is really dangerous. You know, it can actually occur 30 miles outside of a storm. So where you have your storm happening, lightning can go beyond it. So that's why there's a lot of these rules like the 30-30 safety rule. So after you see the last flash of lightning, wait 30 seconds until you hear that thunder. So then you know that that's at least 6 miles away. Then wait another 30 minutes before you go outside. And this is really critical for weather safety to make sure you don't get hit by lightning, because thousands of people are hit by lightning every year. I mean, it's got to be a 1. I don't know anyone who's got the power of weather, and I also don't know anyone who can hold on in 120 mile an hour winds with their tongue.
Right, get right. I'm gonna get the trenches to radio and see if I can get the Weather Channel. What does that thing mean?
There were a lot of cues in that to go somewhere safe and not just be messing around on the staircase. There were sirens going off, there was the loss of power, there was the tornado warning on the television, all things that people need to pay attention to. And those are all serious. You need to go take shelter when those things are happening. So the sirens you hear in the background are common in areas that are tornado prone. So if there's areas that are likely to get tornadoes in the Midwest, a lot of towns have tornado sirens. Now the average for the National Weather Service is somewhere between 8 and 11 minutes of warning before the tornado occurs, letting you know that it's on its way. The way they showed the inside of the house moving, you know, you could see some vibrations and things like that happening during a tornado. If it's passing by, it could last for a fairly long period of time like they showed here. I'd give it about a 7. I don't see too much wrong with it.
My name is Sasha Lucioni, and I'm an AI researcher at Hugging Face, a global startup that works on responsible AI. My research is really around evaluating the ethical and environmental impacts of AI models.
You there? At your service, sir. Engage heads-up display. Check.
Chatbots right now are more like, you know, Siri can set an alarm for you, or Alexa can add, I don't know, chocolate milk to your grocery list, but we are far, far from Jarvis. Sadly, that would be really great though. I think the real challenge of that would be to take all these different sources of information, so Tony Stark's history and what he likes and his habits, and if you start integrating different sources of information, it's really hard to essentially weave them together, because currently AI is not very good at taking different sources of input and stitching it together and responding to it in real time.
So there are still terabytes of calculations needed before an actual flight is a job.
Jarvis, sometimes you gotta run before you can walk.
So the way it usually works now for AI in aviation, it's really responding to, for example, GPS coordinates, altitude, actually wind speeds and wind directions as well. You would have to pre-train the system, so just going out for a test flight like Tony Stark did would be pretty dangerous, because if there's no data about that location, if there's no topology data of the city of Los Angeles, you can be in big trouble. Autopilots in planes use a lot of artificial intelligence, especially when they're cruising, especially when things are pretty stable.
There is a potentially fatal buildup of ice occurring.
If there's like really a life or death decision, like is the case here, ice buildup, we want to make sure that we're listening to the AI instead of just like YOLOing our way through the sky. Most of the AI that's used on planes is human in the loop. Human in the loop is a type of AI system where humans are really involved in the decision making, and it essentially makes sure that no particularly damaging or particularly high stakes decisions get made without a human getting involved in the process somehow. It's really important to have a human pilot call the shots even when the sensors are freezing up, and that's why we always have 2 pilots in planes, because AI isn't really good with new situations it's never been trained with, so you always want to have someone to pick up, in case of a mistake. I would give it a 4 because the elements are there, so we definitely have AI assistants, we definitely have AI autopilot, but it's not at the level of Iron Man. That's actually something that's done right now. I mean, every time you go through a toll booth, for example, in the United States or Canada, it will read your license plate. It could also like figure out what the make of your car is. And we've gotten really good at object recognition, especially in terms of like cars and street scenes, mostly because of autonomous vehicles. Estimating someone's height or like approximate weight is definitely something that people use AI for. Like I would say like in like CCTV surveillance, like especially in, if you're trying to identify someone like a perpetrator, this is something that AI is trained to do. Whether it does it super well will depend. Essentially, like for example, how like if the person's wearing baggy clothing, whether you have objects around the person, if you're trying to figure out like how tall someone is, it's really hard if they're just like in a bare room where you have no objects that you can use to compare and to triangulate, especially. If a person's beside a car or like beside a pool table, then you can really say, well, it's probably like this height. It would be really hard for AI to do hand-to-hand combat in a way that's really like reactive. There's an element of trying to predict what someone will do and reacting quite quickly. And AI is typically not very good at predicting what people, because we're so unpredictable and we're so spontaneous. As human beings, we do this almost subconsciously. Like if you had to, throw something at someone who was running, you would tend to kind of throw it at where you think they would be in a second or two. But for an AI, they would have to like predict the trajectory of someone's movement and then grab them at that time. I would rate this clip an 8. This movie is definitely ahead of its time, and I think it actually came to shape a lot of the AI research that was done in the next decades.
Where am I going? Come on. Stand by. I'm losing picture again.
Looking for another. The entity is knocking out satellites faster than I can hack into them.
So the villain in the recent Mission Impossible movie is a omniscient entity that's an AI algorithm that can hack satellites, that can predict human behavior, that can clone voices. AI can definitely knock out satellites if it's being used by a human. So it's kind of like a computer virus, right? Once you plant the virus, it can do all sorts of things. And actually, AI is being used in hacking. It's being used in kind of like cyber attacks, but it's not like, once again, the agency doesn't come from the AI, it comes from the person who's gonna choose the place to deploy it or like the type of satellite to target.
Reggie, I don't see her. Where is she?
Down the narrow alley and turn left.
The voice cloning was spot on. That can definitely be done already right now. So essentially how AI voice generation works is that if you have enough audio of someone talking, it will learn like the actual voice frequencies, the actual like audio frequencies of someone's voice and the way they talk. And in this case, it really seemed like it was taking words that Benji already said and just like shuffling them around or just playing them back without actually doing the modeling parts.
Ethan, our comms have been breached. You're talking to the entity. Turn right. Take the bridge to your left. Ethan, that is not me.
AI voice duplication has gotten so good. I remember we had a case late 2023 where someone imitated the voice of the mayor of London saying some like super racist remarks. People reached out to us saying like, can you verify if this is really the mayor of London speaking or someone spoofing his voice? And we were listening to those clips obsessively, and it's actually super, super hard to tell. And especially for a public figure like a mayor, there's enough of his voice data out there that you don't even need to like hack into anything. You can just use the clips that are out there, use his speeches. I definitely laughed really hard when they started smashing all their equipment because the vast majority of AI models nowadays don't actually run on your device, on your laptop, on your phones. I give this clip a 3 because of the agency issue. So AI is only a tool, and it can be used for good, it could be used for bad, but by itself, it's not gonna wake up and start hacking satellites. Having so many drones in one spot and being able to like make them all function somehow together for me is really hard to believe because, I mean, currently drones usually work either like by themselves, kind of in high in the sky in terms of warfare, or, you know, sometimes they will have synchronized drones, but more like the tiny little ones for like the firework type displays, but actually having like military drones in such close quarters and not like shooting at each other, I think it's a really big technical challenge.
Stand by for retinol and biometric scan. Shall I execute all cancellation protocols?
Do it! Execute them all!
Confirmed.
Tony Stark's glasses allow anyone using them to control the AI systems that he created. That includes the defense satellites and the combat drones that you see in this clip. You could use smart glasses to control drones if you were talking to your glasses, you know, with all the noise that it's in the clip. Like, you have to be really sure that, you know, that's what he said and that's the instruction that he gave, because there's always some amount of interference. I feel like tech companies have been trying to make smart glasses a thing for like the last decade, but currently they're so clunky and not particularly user-friendly. So, you know, once again, if you wanted someone to be able to control satellites or drones with them, like, they would need to be hooked up to your brain, and we do not have that level of connection between, you know, neural links and smart wearables right now. Like, we're not there yet. I would rate this clip like a 2 for realism.
If you knew the trouble I had getting an AI to read and duplicate facial expressions. So I turned on every microphone and camera across the entire planet.
Getting everyone's cell phone data would be a really hard hack to do. So I would hope that our data is better protected than that, let's say. But of course, like, I mean, you do hear of cases of microphones being switched on when someone's phone is on.
What's your favorite color?
Red.
Lie.
Then what is my favorite color?
I don't know.
So there are AIs that are purported to detect if people are lying and to detect their emotions. The only one I would trust to a certain extent would be things like lie detector tests, which already exist, but that really are based on heartbeats and how stressed people are getting, really in the physiological sense, like how stressed our body is becoming. But anything that's based on just video, for example, of someone talking into a camera, I really wouldn't trust that. For example, if it was trained on Caleb's data, it could tell that Caleb is lying, but it couldn't read his mind, essentially. In that case, you need like direct access to someone's brain. I would rate this a 4 because the whole consciousness aspect and the aspect of detecting a lie just based on, you know, like a single word answer is really hard to believe.
I've run a brothel for 10 years, and if there's one thing I know, it's when I'm being with.
Westworld is pretty realistic in terms of AI, and here they're using a dialogue tree, which isn't really used that much anymore. You could like program chatbots to actually follow essentially like a decision tree based on, you know, inputs, but they're really brittle. Even back then, this was like IBM Watson days, like there were limitations, even like in specific cases of, we were working on like chatbots when you lost your credit card, like they would break quite quickly, so they're already being phased out. And nowadays with the modern day chatbots that are based on large language models, they don't use this kind of like schematic, deterministic way of planning dialogue at all. They're actually based on probabilities and predicting next words. ChatGPT and other dialogue systems sound or look so realistic. It's because they're trained on essentially billions and billions of words. So it's kind of cute because it's like taking like an OG AI technique and using it in like a very forward-thinking, very futuristic context.
I can't.
AI can definitely improvise in the sense that it's no longer hard-coded like the dialogue tree that Maeve had. So it can improvise in the realm of what it was trained on. If you train an AI model on customer service logs and you have people losing their credit cards and, you know, asking where the nearest ATM is, like, it will do fairly well even if you use words that weren't exactly the same ones as what it was trained on. But if you start asking it, like, what is the meaning of life, they will answer things that make no sense, essentially. That's when you know that your system is malfunctioning. I think that the chances that AI drones will mess up are definitely too high for them to be used in warfare. If I was in charge, we wouldn't be using AI drones because I've seen the way AI technologies fail spectacularly, and also for me, using AI to actually like make the decision of who to kill is completely unacceptable from a moral and ethical perspective. Probably what the drone is doing is some form of facial recognition, which drones are able to do. Once again, like if the person's moving around, or also like I don't know how people didn't notice it because like it was obviously flying around. I feel like an AI sniper could do a good job from far away, but in like real time, right? Like detecting a target and shooting the target, but doing that kind of like reconnaissance with a drone and then following up with a sniper, like I feel that that's not very realistic. It's really hard for AI to predict the future in a meaningful way. So for example, once you have that drone that like mapped out where people were, say that they're moving around in that space. So for me, like the implausibility is like, how would the bullet or the missile go from where the drone saw the person to be 5 minutes ago to where the person is if they move. But there's like some piece of the puzzle that's missing for me for those like two steps, first the reconnaissance and then the shooting to take place. The first part is very plausible in terms of technology. So dialogue trees are definitely a thing and were definitely used. But the second part of like the drone controlled bullets for me is just out of this realm, out of our galaxy, honestly. So I guess on an average it would be a 6. Typically, we say swarm intelligence when it's multiple robots. It can be any kind of technology that will coordinate together and will be able to cover more ground or scan more items. And there's a branch of AI called planning. And so, for example, if you have one robot, you have to do all of the corners of a room or a building. But if you have multiple robots, then you can use planning in order to dispatch them in the most optimal way possible so that you spend less time searching.
We got an ID. It's not him.
I think that Minority Report planted a seed in people's brain that you can predict crime. There are lots of people who are working on predictive policing, for example, and these systems get sold to precincts across the world as a way of actually anticipating crimes before they happen. Everything from robots to actual allocations of police resources to certain areas because an AI model told them that that's where the crime was going to happen. And the percentage was 1% accurate of commercial predictive policing systems when they're applied in the real world. I would give this one a 7.
Keep walking. And stop. I figured you were hungry.
Her is definitely a projection of where I think a lot of people would want AI to be. And I think that's why maybe people love that movie so much. And actually, it keeps coming back as an example of an AI girlfriend or companion that's able to read emotions and anticipate needs, definitely in a way that's currently impossible. Especially, for example, oh, I figured you were hungry. I'm wondering how that kind of anticipation can be done, because even as a human, I don't know if we're able to anticipate someone's hunger just by looking at them.
His name is Alan Watts. Do you know him? He was a philosopher. He died in the 1970s, and they input all of his writing and everything they ever knew about him into an OS and created an artificially hyper-intelligent version of him.
Very nice to meet you, Theodore.
That definitely sounds like something complex to do. You could definitely make a limited version of someone who's passed away based on, for example, interviews with that person or writing from that person. So, for example, Abraham Lincoln or Ruth Bader Ginsburg. But once again, it would be a really limited representation of them. It would be like the legal text they wrote or like whatever the laws that they put forth, putting any kind of consent issues aside, but making any kind of like virtual clone of someone is never going to be like their full persona. It's always going to be like a little sliver of who they actually are. Scraping data from the internet, right, like is used for training all these AI language models, and to what extent that's ethical or you know, to what extent consent even is part of the picture for living people is still under debate. So I feel that for dead people is like a next level that we haven't even gotten to yet. I would rate this around a 5. So I think it's halfway there in terms of the capabilities, but of course they're jacked up.
We'd have to cut his higher brain functions without disturbing the purely automatic and regulatory systems.
Currently, the way that AI systems are made, you can't really distinguish between different functionalities. We can't really meaningfully know what part of an AI model is doing what thing. Its ability to generate poetry and not like answer questions, like that's all done under the same hood. There are applications of AI that try to do lip reading, especially for assistance more than surveillance. From what I've seen, you really need to be facing the camera. You need to be speaking relatively slowly. Anytime there's like a beard or you know, or a face mask, for example, then it's obviously impossible. And so I think that in this case, because they're speaking from the side, it would be really hard to use any of the techniques that we currently have for lip reading because you don't really see them speaking at the camera.
I'm afraid my mind is going.
The fact that at the end he's like unplugging the discs or whatever, like we don't do that anymore. I mean, I guess it's not implausible as much as very old-fashioned. There's different levels of self-awareness when it comes to a machine or a computer. HAL can definitely be aware of its drives being unplugged, like the physical absence of a drive that was connected before that's being disconnected now. So that's definitely a form of awareness. It's a form of, you know, interpreting physical knowledge and acting upon that. But whether an AI will be able to associate like a disk being unplugged to death or not existing anymore, so that's really more like the metaphysical property that is a little bit less clear to me. I would rate this clip like a 2 because we're not there yet in terms of lip reading, and we're definitely not there yet in terms of self-awareness. My favorite scene was the dialogue tree scene from Westworld because we see real AI techniques with the names as well, which was really rare in movies, that you actually see something being done and then an explanation of what that exact technique is.
I am Professor Gretchen Benedict. I have been studying meteorites and asteroids for about 20 years. Now we can get asteroids that are fully metallic with all the canyons and things. The asteroids that we do see do not have this kind of debris cloud around them. An asteroid will generally not have too much of this gas coming off of it. It may have some ice in it. That's not going to be the majority of it. I'm pretty sure that we would see something that size headed for us well before it got to that point. Very unrealistic. The biggest myth is that you actually have to steer your spaceship to avoid asteroids. There's a ton of bodies out there. It's a huge amount of space. It's really hard to kind of get into a situation where you might hit something accidentally. You could potentially land on it. It's not like landing on Earth. You're dealing with a totally different gravity regime. You know, we've had a couple of really tiny asteroids that we've got missions from Japan and the US, and they have these little touchdown things. And it's really, really, really hard just to do this tiny little drone-sized thing and land it down on the surface of the asteroid and then get it back off. The amount of power you'd need to actually explode it is impossible. We don't have enough explosive material on the Earth. So there have been some studies done that have shown that if you take an asteroid 20 kilometers across, you need something like 200 gigatons of explosion to break that apart completely. Now, the biggest thing that we've ever exploded on Earth was 50 megatons. So you'd need 4,000 of those to blow up something 20 kilometers across. This thing in this movie is 1,000 kilometers across. You'd need 130,000, 50 megaton bombs to try and blow that particular asteroid up. A shock wave, it's a pressure sound wave. You need atmosphere to have sound. So when the sound is playing in the movie about this explosion happening, that's possible because there is a lot of what we can see as atmosphere there. So there's some gas molecules, and that's going to cause that sound wave to travel. But it's space, so usually there's a whole lot of space in between all of these molecules. So the sound is not going to be what we hear here on Earth. You will have a shock wave, but it won't travel out both sides of a thing. It'll only travel out one direction. That's not how you would actually try to destroy an asteroid that's coming for you. So I would give it a 1 out of 10. 65 million years ago is not when the asteroid got knocked out of the asteroid belt. That is when the asteroid actually hit the Earth. Number 2, wrong. The asteroid belt does not look like that. It's not a donut of rocks that are that close together. Sometimes can get an asteroid family, so you can get one asteroid that has like maybe 3 or 4 other asteroids kind of close to it. So this asteroid gets knocked out. You can have collisions every once in a while. They do get the size of the rock correct. Over time, the sizes of the rocks that are out in space have actually gotten smaller because they do run into each other, but they're really far away from Earth. So not all of them are going to get onto a collision course with Earth. And they don't necessarily impart enough energy to stick it on a direct collision course to the inner solar system. The collisions that occur out there over time have gotten fewer and fewer because we've kind of gone from a really chaotic system 4.5 billion years ago to now it's pretty quiescent. There's a mission called DART. They're trying to take a small asteroid, they're going to push it with their little spacecraft and see if it will change its orbit in any way. Then the movie takes a different tact and says, well, it missed. The orbit was such that it kind of got close, but it flew by. Now, we do have objects that fly by. That's kind of cool. And that I don't think a 6-mile asteroid would actually skim the atmosphere and then bounce out again. But you can do that with smaller sized objects. Again, 1 out of 10 for realism. I love this show, and in terms of the realism about everything else, they actually use real asteroid shape files. They have coated it with material that would make it hard to see. The amount of light that's reflecting off the surface is the only way we can tell that that thing is there. So we can see it moving, and if it's moving fast and it's bright enough, the amount of light it reflects from the sun is how we tell it's there. So if they've coated it with this coating that's stealthy, then the system that they have in place to detect incoming asteroids, that would fail. So that actually makes sense. I would be surprised if he didn't hear it, to be honest, because that would be a very loud, rumbly noise that you would kind of notice before you saw the light. There have been fireballs that have come across, we get images of them and people don't hear them or see them. Or sometimes people will hear something but never see the fireball itself. For this particular scene, all of that makes sense. You'd feel the thermal radiation before you felt the shockwave. That's definitely realistic. So even if you're like 500 kilometers away, you might feel the thermal radiation in maybe a minute, whereas you might not feel the shockwave for half an hour or more, an hour. And the effects of the thermal radiation would be burning. Your clothing could burn off. Your skin might not, but I imagine that it would. It would just depend on how far away from the impact you are. It's at least an 8 out of 10 for realism. Pause on the comet. Let's talk about that first. There's this whole bunch of smaller bodies in between Mars and Jupiter that we called asteroids, and asteroids are really rocky metallic bodies. Comets come from farther out in the solar system. Comets are composed primarily of ice and dust. The fireball that we're seeing here, these bits of material are fragmenting off, and they are still moving fast enough so that they can exhibit a glow as well. That is a normal thing that you would see, just not at this size and distance. The size of this rock is about the same size as the rock that caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. So having shelters is a good idea because we know what that asteroid did. We'd want to be underground. Potentially could devolve into that level of governments making choices about randomly picking people to save and then finding shelters for them to go into. What we're seeing is that the entire Earth has been wrecked and poisoned. There would be potentially a global dust layer on top of everything, but you would not necessarily see the level of shock damage or structural damage that is being shown here for every place on the planet. You could potentially have sunlight be blocked for quite a while, and then that could settle down 2 or 3 out of 10. We've never witnessed something this size hit a terrestrial planet.
Come to a simple.
What we're seeing is the smoke trail. We're not actually seeing the fireball and then an explosion. That's not how it works. It would be something that is like a fireball and then a trail of smoke behind it. You know, we have evidence of this. In 2015, this several tens of meters wide object came through the atmosphere in Russia and it fragmented and people caught the whole thing on dash cams. So the impact itself would potentially cause a lot of material to come out. I don't think it would go straight up like that. It would more spill out sideways, and then the shock wave would come after. Certain impacts can burst your eardrums because of the air burst afterwards. So if it's big enough, yeah, you can get noise levels that are well beyond, you know, breaking your eardrums. There's a trail, a skidded track to the end of the trail. No, that doesn't happen with impacts. Impacts are an all or nothing thing. Even if they come in at a really steep angle, it will still make a single hole and it won't have a gouge in the earth leading up to it. It's gonna be a 0 on this one.
Does that look like a problem to you?
Meteor shower!
They call this a meteor shower. The size of that thing is not a meteor. Those are big rocks. We now know meteors are really tiny, small specks of dust. So meteors are different than asteroids and comets and meteorites. We're talking about tiny dust particles that are between the size of sand grains to maybe a small pebble size that are burning up in the atmosphere. So this is a fireball, or even we could even call it a bolide if we're feeling super scientific. If you see a fireball and it looks like it's headed for you, stand there until the very last possible second, because if it's small, you might be able to jump out of the way, but probably not. And if it's big, it doesn't matter. I get this a lot. I saw a fireball over there, so it must have just landed over on the other side of my field. No, if you see a fireball, it's actually really far away because it's very high in the atmosphere.
Woohoo! I'm on fire! Woohoo!
You would not be catching fireballs. And if a fireball hit you like it hit those two, you would be fried. You'd be in the crater that was left behind. From the perspective of science, it's not realistic. So I give this, I think, a 1 out of 10. From the perspective of a rock hitting the ground that came from space, yes, that's a meteorite.
Bring your phone. Come on.
No, don't go near. Don't go near.
It glowing on the ground, no, that's wrong. So that means there's something inside of it. It might glow as it's coming through the atmosphere because the chemistry of the rock might interact with the atmosphere, so you could get different colors that way. Purple would tell you something about the elements that are in it. Meteors that glow different colors, but again, those are just small pieces of dust.
Smells.
The amount of smoke coming out of it, like a barbecue, that is not something that you would see. a meteorite coming through the atmosphere, it heats up, but only the outside. So when it hits the ground, it's actually really cold because space is cold and it's been out in space. And there have been reports of people finding meteorites very shortly after they've fallen and them having ice on them. And if you're going to get burned from it, it's going to be freezer burn, not a heat burn. You can get close to them as long as they haven't come in at a massive speed. Peak scale meteorite in the US, October 1992. When the meteor was seen across about 16 states, it actually hit the boot of a car in New York and punched a hole through the car.
Did you plant those?
No.
It would not be something that is actually alive after having gone through that atmospheric thing, unless the meteorite is somehow a spaceship, which generally they're just rocks. The idea that there could be life on a meteorite, that's one area of study in our world. We check for evidence of either organic material or like the precursors of organic things that could potentially harbor life. We haven't found any so far. So we've found precursor materials, but no actual evidence of life. The color, it doesn't glow on the ground at all. I'm going with 0 out of 10 on this one. This is the comet, and it is hitting water. The odds of anything hitting water are really high on the Earth. That tsunami wave looks very high to me, but I think you could get a tsunami wave that was something like 600 meters high with the size of that object. The running away part, in general, you're going to have some time before the tsunami hits. As we know from recent events with volcanoes in the middle of the Pacific, it takes a long time for the tsunami to get to wherever it's going. If the impact is upon you, you have no warning. The only way that happens is if we haven't tracked it. And the only way that happens is if we're not looking. And so none of those things are happening. You wouldn't have this level of water coming inland as far as I think this is. So even if the impact had happened very close to shore, the depth of the water would be less, so the wave would be lower. This is completely no. I would probably head for the middle of a continent if I knew it was going to hit water. Deep impact for realism, I give it a 1 out of 10.
Why does the ephemeris keep getting lower and lower? Professor Mindy?
So this is really good. I like this aspect of it. Is we're going to run through the numbers and we're going to do the calculations from first principles. 0.0 means we're getting close to the Earth. That doesn't mean it's going to hit, because 0.05 AU is still farther away than the moon. The way we currently check for things that might be potentially hazardous is when we do these calculations, we work out, well, if it's going to be closer than 0.05 AU from the Earth, then we call it potentially hazardous. There's a good chance it'll never hit. So his worry is probably not unfounded. It happens several times a year that you'll get something at this 0.05 or less. But generally, the sizes of the objects are only a few meters or tens of meters across. This particular size comet would not completely decimate. It would not take out the Earth. It would destroy it, but it wouldn't break it apart. It would make it a mess, but it wouldn't even wobble it off its orbit. I think they said it's like 10 to 15 miles across. Even the moon-forming event, which was a Mars-sized object smacking into the Earth, did not destroy the Earth. The probability of something the size of what these things show actually hitting is so infinitesimally small at this point because the solar system has evolved over time. So don't be afraid. We're doing a really good job of tracking things. We have a much better handle on how we look out in space.